For the past 20 years, Russia has been dominated by one man, Vladimir Putin. But with the ongoing protests over Alexei Navalny, can his grip on power be challenged? Russia, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, was a lawless place. The economy was in shambles. The people who had been factory bosses in the Soviet Union had seized the means of production for themselves, taking control of the economy. They would eventually be known as the Russian oligarchs. Their great wealth translated into political power on the president at the time, Boris Yeltsin, who was a pro-democratic reformer, but unpopular in Russia for cozying up to the West. He also happened to be an alcoholic. Putin, who had first served in St. Petersburg's administration, was seen as a suitable successor to Yeltsin by the oligarchs, who believed he would preserve their wealth and control over the Russian economy. He arrived in power in 1999, first as prime minister and later as president the next year, when Yeltsin resigned. Russia under Putin would change drastically. A war in Chechnya would cement his popularity, and he would rein in the oligarchs, though they maintained strong control over the economy. A crackdown on other political parties meant that his United Russia Party became the strongest political force in the country. While in 1999 it didn't exist, by 2003 it was the largest party in the Duma, the Russian National Assembly, and by 2020 it had an absolute majority at the national level and in most regional councils. Controlling the Duma and nearly all of the regional and local councils, Putin cemented his grip on power on the entire country, controlling state media and sidelining the opposition, which is now virtually inexistent in Russia's power structure. There is rampant corruption in the country due to the control of the economy and political system by Putin and the people who helped him enter power, which undermines growth and opportunities for the Russian people. Russian opposition figures are either prosecuted or assassinated, like Boris Nemtsov, who was shot 6 times near the Kremlin in 2015. Yet the recent failed assassination attempt on Alexei Navalny has backfired, starting protests all across the country and leading to international condemnation. So who is the man challenging Putin? Alexei Navalny is a lawyer and an economist, 2 skills that would prove invaluable to him when he first joined the public sphere in 2000, at the very start of the Putin presidency. He joined the liberal Yabuklo party, where he worked on grassroots initiatives in Moscow, helping people stop illegal constructions. Yet he was kicked out of the party in 2007 over harboring nationalist views incompatible with the party and participating in a series of marches with Russian nationalist groups. See the flags at the protests? Those are the flags of the Russian Empire in the 1800s. He would go on to co-found the People, a nationalist movement in 2008, and would support the aggressive foreign policy of Putin. In the 2008 invasion of Georgia, he called for the expulsion of all Georgians whom he labeled as rodents, but he would later retract the insult, but not his calls for expulsions. When Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, Navalny called the move illegal, but supported the policy saying that Crimea is ours, and even saying that Russians and Ukrainians were one and the same people. While he harbored nationalist views, tackling corruption within Russian society would be at the center of his activism. Navalny started making investigations into the dealings of Russia's corrupt elite and industry. In 2008, he bought shares in a series of Russian state-owned firms to gain access to confidential information, using it to reveal how funds were being misused. The companies would buy overpriced equipment through intermediate firms, which pocketed the difference. Navalny would go on to make associations between corruption in Russia and the Putin regime, calling Putin's United Russia the party of crooks and thieves. His further activism saw him establish more grassroots activities, such as the Rosmaya initiative, which created online forums to request potholes be fixed, empowering citizens to hold their government accountable to the law. His anti-corruption and government accountability efforts would redouble with the founding of his Anti-Corruption Foundation in 2011, a non-profit organization which helped him investigate more cases. The foundation, which started with 3 people, had grown to 40 by 2019. But there were attempts by the Russian establishment to have Navalny enter their ranks. In 2012, he was offered a board position at Aeroflot, a Russian airline, on the recommendation of Alexander Lebedev, a Russian oligarch. Yet his continued activism and political involvement got him in trouble in 2013, when he co-founded the Russian Progress Party, an unofficial political party whose registration has continuously been denied by the Russian Justice Ministry. He lost his position at Aeroflot and stood accused in the Kirovles case, which framed him for theft of public goods. Vladimir Putin promised him a fair trial, an indication that it would be anything but. He was first sentenced to 5 years, triggering what had up until then been rare protests in Russia, and the sentence was inexplicably removed. But his fortunate release had led people to question whether he had ties with the Russian government and was being used as a distraction to sow dissent in the Russian opposition. This is an idea that continued to permeate within Russian society and would undermine his credibility in the eyes of Russians up until 2020. The timing of the case also happened to coincide with the Moscow mayoral election, which had attempted to bar him from running in. Being ultimately allowed to run, he lost to the pro-Putin candidate, but won an unexpected 27% of the vote, coming second and cementing him as one of Russia's main opposition figures. Regardless of his countless encounters with the Russian legal system, time spent in jail for encouraging anti-government protests, and attacks which involved the throwing of dye in his face, and his brother being sentenced to jail for embezzlement, while Navalny was only given a 3.5-year suspended sentence, Navalny would only scale up his attacks on the Russian establishment. His focus shifted from investigations on oligarchs and the Russian economy to people closer to Putin's inner circle, in an attempt to undermine the president's legitimacy. These included the Attorney General's son, by linking him to the mafia in 2015, or attacks on Dmitry Medvedev, the Russian Prime Minister in 2017, whom he estimated to have embezzled $1.2 billion worth of Russian funds. In 2018, Navalny attempted to run for the Russian presidential election, where he was once again barred from running due to a suspended prison sentence from the Kirovles case. Despite being barred, Navalny started a system of tactical voting, which would enable Russian voters to pick the candidate that would be the most likely to win and to challenge the monopoly of United Russia, already to some success. His bare-bones presidential program hints at an ideal of the reforms he would implement: a strong anti-corruption drive, a Russia-first approach, a decrease in Russia's involvement in foreign policy, an opposition to immigration from Central Asia, closer collaboration with the rest of Europe, and a ban on members of Putin's system from running in government ever again. The crackdown by the Putin regime on his message and platform only intensified after that, seeing his anti-corruption association being labeled a foreign agent in 2019, making it subject to more checks by authorities and susceptible to being disbanded. Yet at the same time, his unrecognized political party saw its first successes in Siberia, where it broke the majority of United Russia, threatening Putin's power in the region. He was returning from campaigning there when he fell ill on a flight. The flight was diverted, and thanks to quick work from paramedics, he survived. As tests conducted by the German military would later show, Navalny was poisoned with Novichok, a nerve agent previously used in other Russian assassination attempts. Navalny even survived a second assassination attempt when he was in the hospital, while Russian doctors refused to approve his transfer to Germany. When he went there, still in a coma, he was treated as Angela Merkel's personal guest. After recovering, and in collaboration with Bellingcat, an investigative reporting agency, he looked into the assassination attempts made against him and called the Russian FSB agents involved in the operation, tricking them into confessions and linking them to Putin. The claims were then denied by Russian state media, which called Bellingcat a CIA-backed news agency. After recovering from his poisoning, Navalny returned to Russia with one goal in mind: removing Putin from power. As you probably expected, he was arrested on landing and served 30 days in prison. While in prison, his anti-corruption foundation released the Putin's Palace documentary, revealing a $1 billion resort on the Black Sea, supposedly owned by Vladimir Putin. The story caused embarrassment to Putin, who was forced to deny, and a friend and ally of his came out announcing the palace was his. The documentary, alongside Navalny's arrest, have triggered massive anti-government protests, calling for his freedom, with some braving the -50 degrees of Siberia to go to the streets. He was condemned to 2.5 years in prison over a suspended sentence, which turned into actual jail time over missing parole when he was recovering in a coma. At his trial, which saw widespread international condemnation, Navalny called Putin a poisoner and a thieving little man. While Navalny has often been downplayed by the Kremlin, which has continuously refused to call him by his name, the assassination attempt and their reaction to his return to Russia and imprisonment have elevated his status, turning the perception of him from a perceived puppet into a legitimate opposition figure. It has increased his profile in Russia and at the same time hampered Putin's legitimacy, particularly in the eyes of the Russian youth, something that the Kremlin is now trying to combat. Despite his gain in popularity, national polls continue to show Navalny lagging behind Putin. They reveal Navalny's struggle in conquering a media landscape dominated by state media, where he is never mentioned or only so in a negative light. But the protests go beyond who he is. While Navalny remains unpopular with the Russian middle class, who dislike his populist and nationalist message, he has become a symbol of the fight against Putin's regime and the corruption that goes with it. Yet without support from members of Russia's establishment, who have benefited from Putin's rule and are sticking with their president, there is little anyone will be able to do to promote change in Russia. The Euromaidan revolution in Ukraine only yielded political results because some of the establishment sided with the protesters. While Navalny has caused an awakening, his 2.5-year sentence has left protesters without a leader to rally around. The question is now whether the opposition can mobilize enough numbers to take down the sources of Putin's power, the local and regional councils, which are almost exclusively controlled by United Russia. With elections to the Duma this year, the Russian National Assembly, it remains to be seen if they can unseat United Russia. To Russians who do not support Navalny, he may yet become a symbol of Russian change, rather than the politician he wants to be. The election in a tumultuous time like this is likely to see widespread rigging, which will continue to undermine Putin's legitimacy, but not his grip on power. With Russia's legal system firmly in Putin's hands, Navalny will likely serve the full sentence, but only time will tell what will happen when and if he reemerges from Russian prison. This was Interrupt. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to receive the latest updates and analysis on European news.